Welcome to Island Living Today, a monthly speaker series where local experts share valuable insights to enhance your home ownership experience on Vancouver Island. This series is brought to you by top realtors on Vancouver Island. Connie Henschel, who brings 15 years of care and integrity to every client interaction, creating ideal matches between people and homes. Denise Hodgins, who specializes in the finest properties in the Mid-Island region, delivering exceptional service along the way. And Laura Healy, who's passionate about sharing her in-depth real estate knowledge and professional connections with her clients. Thank you for joining Island Living Today and being a part of our community.
Well, welcome everyone. Today we're really excited to have Melissa McGuire joining us. Melissa is from Raymond James, and she is here to talk about retirement finances and how to ensure a smooth transition into the lifestyle you've always dreamed of living. Melissa was educated at the University of Victoria and began her career in the financial services industry over 10 years ago. She holds the Responsible Investment Specialist designation, a certificate in advanced financial services advice, and a certificate in wealth management essentials. In addition, she holds the most prestigious financial planning designation, Certified Financial Planner. Melissa serves clients across Vancouver Island, straddling her work between Victoria, Nanaimo, and Qualicum Beach. Melissa is active member of Rotary Club, and her family, with her husband and 2 sons, is always ready to serve the community whenever needed. Thank you, Melissa, very much for joining us. We're looking really forward to all the information you have to share, and we're going to pass it over to Denise, and we'll start with some questions.
Awesome. Oh, well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know you're super busy right now. It's a busy time of year for financial planners coming up to tax time. So I know your time is valuable. So thank you again. So many of you, Melissa is based out of Qualicum Beach, and she is truly a wealth of knowledge. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out today. There's a chat box that you can put questions in. We will have a Q&A at the end that you can ask Melissa your questions. So jot things down if they come to mind, because if you're like me, you'll forget. And let's get going. So the first thing, Melissa, for many people, the ultimate saving goal is to work to retire. Like that's what we all do. Like hi ho, we off to work we go so we can retire. And you're a certified financial planner. So in what you do, how do you support folks, I guess, during and after someone retires so that they can have a smooth transition and enjoy their retirement?
Well, that's a great question. First, I wanted to say thanks so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be asked to do this, so thank you. Yeah, so the question of how to support somebody sort of as they proceed into the world of being retired and then afterward, it really, like our support really comes in the form of planning. So, going from your working lives that we do forever and ever and ever, and then switching to your retired life, while it is like something to be celebrated and we're all very excited about it, it also can be something that's really, really scary to get into because everything shifts. We go from saving to spending, and then worried about longevity, worried about family planning, worried about estate planning, like all of that sort of stuff starts to happen once we start to really go down the retirement road. In general, like for us, it all becomes about, the plan and how we, look at that plan, look at the goals, look at the process, and then go from there. So for us at like our branch, we were all about, first we plan and then we invest for that plan. And then we have 5 pillars that we work with at our office to make sure that we sort of stick within the plan as our clients work through their retirement years. So our pillars, like we talk about capital preservation, that's a big one for us because when people retire, they want their money to be there until they don't need it anymore. Talk about tax efficiency because when when you're starting to draw a different type of income, you want to make sure that we're efficient in how we do that and not causing accidental tax hiccups or surprises along the way. We also talk about consistency of income. So Denise, when you mentioned how things are getting to be more expensive all the time, and we think about, oftentimes people who are retired are on fixed incomes. We want to make sure that we are able to be consistent with those incomes, but meet the needs that people have as they move through the stages of retirement. Of course, we want to talk about growth. That's always our fourth retirement pillar. And then the fifth, we talk about estates and how people want to set, the next generation up from there.
Right. So that's fabulous. And when is it too late to start this?
Oh, it's never too late.
Okay.
Like, it's never too late to make a plan. We might be making a plan. We might start when somebody's 25, or we might start when somebody's just going to retire tomorrow, or we might start a little bit later because somebody's been retired for a certain amount of years, but life has changed and they have some questions. So it's having a financial plan in place. It's never too late to do one. Obviously, if we can start saving earlier, that's great, and plan for things earlier, that's great. But it doesn't mean that if you haven't, that you no longer have the option to.
Oh, perfect.
Melissa, that leads us right perfectly into our next question. That is, what are some expenses that retirees commonly underestimate? Other, like, taking apart inflation, like that we can't control. But what are some expenses that they might underestimate or not think about?
That again is a really good question, because it can be very specific to each person, depending on what it is that they want their retirement to look like. What I have seen a lot of, though, in my experience, is people underestimate how much they can gift to their families while they're living. So that is a thing, because we want to help our families, right? And I think for a lot of people, when they're retired and they're now in a position of being able to be there for their families, maybe their grandkids, or maybe help their kids through their next stages of life. Often we have people who are looking to gift large sums amount of money to people that they think they'd rather do it now rather than wait for the estate process. And all of that is fantastic if people are looking to do that. We're always just the ones, though, that say, okay, well, let's make sure that your plan or your lifestyle or your upcoming needs are going to allow for that, and then go from there. So usually it's gifting, and then it might be like travel or even just general discretionary expenses that can add up.
I was going to say, because you don't know how long you're going to live, right? So, I mean, if you live an extra 10 years, or maybe you decide, maybe you need care, right? Those are things that are all things that you like, you have to kind of have a series of plan A, B, and C, maybe, in my opinion. But I know a lot of people get very focused in on the cost of probating an estate, and they tend to like to give money in a living will or in a living matter when they can. They also get to see the people that they love enjoy that, right? It's quite beautiful.
I think there's something remarkable in being able to do that, but there's also something remarkable in being able to manage your own needs at the same time. And so that gifting strategy, while there, might look a little different, right? We might be like, no, 50,000 right now might be a little painful, but how about we do 10,000 over a series of years, if, depending on what it is that they're looking to gift for. And you bring up a really good point, Laura, about care costs. So working in Qualicum Beach, we have a very unique experience up here in Qualicum, and really getting to understand, the cost of care for people, whether it's private or public, or what the whole process looks like. And we often do have plan A, B, and C for, what happens when we're planning for different types of care. If you're going to go into a care facility, for example, people, if they're going to move into the Berwick or something, and move in there, and then what happens is you might need to go up the floors into different types of complex care. So definitely those are definitely parts that they might be often underestimated, but we plan for those too.
Well, from the real estate perspective, we always see the conversation of downsizing be a very tricky one for clients to have. And so,
yeah, for sure. It's a trigger point for a lot of people, because it kind of is the first step out the door, per se. So, we talk about retirees, but retirees come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and ages. When you used to think about a retiree, they were seniors, like they were 60, 65, 70 years old. But now we're seeing a lot of people retiring at a younger age. And so what strategies can these people use? Because the strategy of somebody, say 45 or 50 years old, who's deciding to retire, opposed to somebody who's 65 or 70 might be slightly different. So they're transitioning from the saving mindset, and now they have to feel comfortable with spending the money. And depending on how old they are and where they are in that scope of things, that's a big step, like the security of it. So what type of strategy would you talk to people about?
The strategy it's going to be very different for sort of each age group as they look to retire. For example, if we have somebody who is going to retire at 55, let's say, we might have a bit of a very serious conversation about retirement, what it looks like at that age, because there's more time to do all of the fun things, right? And before all the costs catch up with you. For example, I'm thinking about like travel medical insurance. We know that gets to be astronomical in costs when you hit like age 80-ish or something, right? So there's more time to be able to do things. So our serious conversations at that point, really, we try to get to the heart of what people are looking to do in their retirement, and then what that spending will look like. Now, when they retire earlier, we sometimes don't have as many options for income flow as we might if somebody retires later, right?
Why is that?
Well, they might not have, government pensions might not kick in yet, right? Like CPPs can start at age 60 if you want to take a reduction on it. OAS, like old age security, doesn't start until 65. There's no way to get that earlier. So, and sometimes even like work pensions, if you're lucky enough to have one, there's a very large reduction that happens to that pension if you're going to start at age 55, if your pension will allow for it. Right. So the strategy then is working with the pieces that we have and knowing when the other pieces to the puzzle are going to get involved. Now, if somebody is retiring, at age 65, well, then those puzzles are there, or those pieces to the puzzle are there right away. And then that strategy becomes about how to make sure that we're making all of those pieces work together successfully to not cause taxable events, to not cause estate issues down the way, to not, to make sure that we're drawing income exactly as we need to. And maybe we look to delay the CPP and OAS if we can, depending on what all the other pieces of the puzzles look like.
Wow, so complicated.
Well, it can be for sure. But then also, I'll note that there's quite a lot of people these days that are retiring later too, because these people have found sort of their purpose and what they're looking to do and want to work a little bit later because they can. And that changes the strategy as well, because we could go a certain period of time with delaying our CPP and our OAS. But, if somebody has a registered retirement savings account that turns into a registered retirement income fund, we must change it and start drawing income at a certain time. And once we do that, then the strategy changes again.
And that's at what, 71, I think, isn't it?
At age 71, you must convert your plan, and age 72 is the first year that you must draw from it. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Crazy.
Well, I want to jump around a little bit in questions, so hopefully Denise will follow with me, because there's a question that
no.
I know. There's a question down in the list that is just so my cup of tea. So what are the most tax efficient ways for retirees to draw income from savings and investments?
Well, it's different for everybody. That's a beautiful thing.
No, we're not getting any black and white answers here.
The beautiful thing about my job is there could be a process, and then there's always a puzzle. I think it's similar to how everybody does their job. But there are some sort of ways that we look at things. Like if we think about a typical like age 65 retirement, let's say, and we might look at sort of a typical income stream that might come from that. So let's say we've got savings that we've built up to in an RSP or a tax-free savings account. We've got a pension that we're looking at, let's say at this point, we're not going to reduce CPP, or we're not going to reduce, or not reduce, but delay CPP or OAS. You know, we have a bunch of income flows we possibly could use at this period of time. And we want to make sure that we're using the right ones at the right time in the right way, so that we're not causing issues for other things. So for example, if we took too much money out of you know, a RIF at that point, let's say we're going to convert early to a RIF. If we took too much money out of that, and you know, you wind up making too much money, well, then we might experience a clawback on the old age security, right? So then suddenly you don't get as much money from that, because you know, you apparently make too much money on this end. So when we think of efficient strategies, you know, we want to make sure that income that we're drawing, that we don't have to draw, but like in terms of have to, because the government is making us, if we don't have to draw it, that we focus on really tax efficient like investments. And so those are ones that are going to give you like good growth. So that's super quickly, if I think about the 3 different types of, you know, taxable income that we could get, you know, you get regular income, you get interest income, there's capital gains income, and, you know, dividend income, I guess that's 4. But, you know, we use all of those because 3 of the 4 have a preferred strategy for taxation. So we want to say, like, okay, if we know that, you know, we're going to have a non-registered account, for example, this is the account that's going to experience all the tax. And we would say, okay, well, we're going to do a certain amount of, you know, income from this account, but we're going to draw it in such a way that it's not going to be added to your income dollar for dollar. So that if you took out $50,000, your income doesn't show up as $50,000. We want to make sure that we're efficient with how that comes out. Once we start adding, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
And so there always seems to be so many complex strategies, because I've just started making my plan for retirement. So I mean, I'm say in my 40s, right? And I've sat with the bank person who I've dealt with for years. And, you know, we've created over the last 3 years has been the bulk of my income earning, or the last 4 years, for example. And so, you know, you're making your plan, right? But you have no way to predict what the future looks like. But the tax complications of everything, it's like you're just kind of getting into. There seems to be so many layers that it's like you seem to have a professional financial person, an accountant, you know, and then the rules change all the time. The amount that you can put into TSFA changes, you know, the amount this. So you really have to be almost like attending a seminar once a year to learn the latest, greatest, it seems, you know. So, or like you said, be working with you, and then you'll know, you'll
That's
be like,
literally
this is
her job.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, but I mean, for years I thought, oh, I could self-manage this. This shouldn't be that hard. I'm smart. And I'm very quickly realizing that's not the case. You know, it's way more complex.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of smart people out there that can do a lot of great things. But this is what I do all day, every day. This is what I've studied for years, right? I would never in a million years think that I would be able to sell my own home or like know anything about that on my own. But I do know this because this is my specialty. So, you know, when it comes to things like the tax-free savings contribution room changing, well, we know what that is by like November, if we can. Like, we're already paying attention, waiting to see what's going to happen. If we have changes to our tax rules, we had a big one this year, you know, we're all paying very close attention to see how we're going to, you know, work with that, because it's what we love to do. We love to have our ear to the ground and know how all these changes are going to impact our clients as we move along. So sometimes it can be very, very simple. It's just a matter of how we draw the pieces together to get to what we want, making sure that we don't create a taxable event, or make sure that it's the way that the plan needs it to be. Sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's a little bit more complicated, but working with a planner really will help you get through that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know, it's super important. And like you said, there's certain things that you just need a professional for that's really got their, you know, finger on the point, and they know all the details, especially in our current economy.
Yeah. Well, that kind of segues into finding the cash, first of all, to retire. So we've talked about, you know, you've got your pensions, you've got your OAS, all that kind of stuff. But how about the people that are downsizing? So homeowners typically have a number of ways to access extra cash, such as I said, downsizing, accessing their home equity, maybe a reverse mortgage. Can you walk people through those scenarios, and are they even appropriate? Is it something people should be considering?
Like what the scenarios of what each sort of access to
Down,
cash might look
like
like?
accessing extra cash in order to bump up your retirement. So by downsizing your home, maybe to access all the funds, maybe pulling out home equity, getting a line of credit or something and using that to live, or maybe a reverse mortgage. Like, what about those options? Are they something that's viable?
Well, and Denise, to add something, we work so hard and we're trained or we're told our whole life that our end goal is to pay our mortgage off.
Mhm.
And then you get to retirement, and at that point, then your largest asset is your home in most cases, and maybe it's worth
Absolutely.
$1 million in Qualicum. All your money's tied up in it, but you need somewhere to live.
Mhm.
And so and then you've been mentally trained for years, in my opinion, that you don't want to have to pay costs. And so like a lot of the strategies incur a cost, like a reverse mortgage incurs a cost potentially, you know, a line of credit incurs a cost, you know, all of these things. And I see it over and over when like someone who's widow goes to sell the house and they're house rich and cash poor. And they'll often have to borrow money from a child to have a down payment on the condo they purchased because all of their money is literally tied up in their house and or their investments. So it's, if they're not getting the proper advice, it can be a very daunting experience, right? And also it's like, it feels like you're downgrading from a real estate standpoint, because you go from your beautiful rancher with your beautiful garden you've built up for years to half the size to a condo with no yard in many cases. And so I know Denise, myself, and Connie have a lot of conversations about when is the right time to do it. Is there a time when it's the right time, too early, too late? What are the risks of both? But from your financial perspective, there's got to be some input there.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on accessing funds that way in order to bump up your retirement or even just to retire, period?
Well, sometimes I think also we should maybe recognize that sometimes the selling of a home is a celebration because of all of the time that we've been taught to pay down our mortgages. And then, you know, we're there and now we can go. And sometimes the downsize is actually really fun. Sometimes it's, you know, because of health reasons or other different things that come up, but sometimes it's like kind of a woohoo, now I'm going to access this cash sort of in a tax, you know, preferred way, and, you know, let's start living our life and travel. So when it's always, again, always different, but in terms of the options, we often see people downsize because, you know, that's always been their plan, right? They're going to, and when we're working with financial plans, if we're starting this like, you know, 5 years or so before retirement, or we're starting it a couple of years before retirement, the question always comes up of what about your home? Like, what are we going to do with that? Are you going to live in your home forever? Or are you going to move out as soon as you can? Like, what's the plan? And we keep that in the plan. So if I think about, you know, some reasons that we see people, you know, sell their homes. Sometimes, again, they sell their home because they want to move into a condo or they want to move into an independent living facility or something like that. You know, that's just sort of an access to cash and capital. And now what do we do to make sure that we invest it the right way so that we're able to live off of it and draw the income? That's sort of the plan that we have at that point. Some people, they want to live in their home for forever and ever.
Yeah.
And as you say, they are, you know, because of how sort of the world has been for the past bunch of years, they're house rich and cash poor. So that's where we start seeing the lending strategies come into play. So prior to becoming a financial planner, I was also a mortgage lender for a lot of years. So I'm well familiar with, you know, what it looks like for lines of credits or extra mortgages or, you know, reverse mortgages. And they're definitely solutions. They're not without their costs. And that's always really important. Laurie already mentioned sort of the costs of things. It's important to note what that looks like. So again, we plan for that. When we do like home equity lines of credits or like other mortgages to access capital, sometimes we see people do that to help their kids buy properties and, you know, that sort of stuff. We always have to consider what the repayment plan for that will look like. And if we find ourselves in an environment like we have for the past few years where that interest rate has fluctuated greatly, you know, we try to prepare for that as best we can. And our preparation means that, you know, we are being very conservative in rates of return that we're looking for, or we're being very conservative in terms of, you know, longevity or borrowing rates and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, we have to be able to prepare and know that we're going to have payments if we're going to do that. Oftentimes people will look to the home equity line of credit option instead of doing a reverse mortgage because they see that the home equity line of credit is sort of cheaper, because the reverse mortgage is a little bit different. Now, I'm not a specialist in this and I don't know the costs outside, like as they really pertain to the reverse mortgage, but that is also a strategy that we see people use all the time. And it's not necessarily a bad one. There are protections in place to make sure that when people borrow using the reverse mortgage strategy, that they're not borrowing too much. You know, they're borrowing something that, you know, if they need to sell their home later on for their own care costs or their estate plan, you know, it's not going to repay only the amount of the reverse mortgage and not have anything left over. Obviously, that is a risk, but is one that they work to mitigate.
Yeah.
So that is a way to do it as well. So you have a lump sum of money that comes out depending on the schedule. But the part that people like about that is that there isn't a payment required. And that payment and that interest sort of builds up in the background on the property and then gets taken care of when they sell their home or when their estate sells the home. It really depends on, you know, what their sort of overall plan is when we start talking about it, or who's going to recoup that cost. Oftentimes I'll explain to people that they're not the ones that have the mortgage. The home owns is responsible for the mortgage when it comes to a reverse mortgage.
Yeah.
Regular like mortgage or home equity line of credit, well, you're responsible for it. It is on your home, but you have to pay for it while you're, you know, borrowing. And as you borrow more, that payment goes up. So always part of our conversation.
Well, one of the other things people have to think about is a lot of people defer their taxes, especially now taxes are going up and up like everything else. And so if you're deferring your taxes and you're doing a reverse mortgage, it all accumulates over time, you know, so that's
But I've
something.
recently learned because
Yeah.
of that, we're not actually allowed to defer our taxes anymore when we have a reverse mortgage.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
and that's, you know, because of that.
Yeah.
So,
That's for good reason.
I also had some clients get some shocking bills last year because the interest rate, there's an interest rate cost added to the reverse of the mortgage and some of the, or of the deferral of the property taxes. And so I know some people have done it for years and years and the cost has been so low, but with the prime rate increasing and other things increasing, they then looked at it, does it make sense to refer it anymore? And then when they didn't want to defer it, they had to pay it off. So then all of a sudden they have to find the cash. So you really have to think through it because I mean, or sell the home. And I mean, depends on where you're at that state. But yeah, I mean, I can see it in certain scenarios, but I think that the game of leveraging your property by not paying your property taxes may not be as appealing as it once was from what I've heard from clients. But I mean, unfortunately, I'm in a position, fortunately and unfortunately, I'm in a position where I still pay my property taxes. So I'm not eligible to take advantage of any of those programs.
and you know what, it really also becomes about people's feelings toward debt, right? And what they want to do, because it might be a solution that people could have, but some people are adamant that they don't want any debt, and they would, because you know the town wherever you are puts a lien on your property when you start doing that, and it can be terrible for some people to experience that. People have worked really hard to be debt free. It might be something we say, hey, have you thought of this? And then it's a resounding no, because I don't want debt. And we say, okay, let's work on a different strategy then. As long as we all know what's happening then.
Well, and I'm of the perspective that if you financially plan correctly, using someone like yourself, that you have a plan to draw up the right amount of income that you can afford the costs of your home. Because if you are mortgage free at that point, the cost of owning property taxes, like mine have not gone double over the last 10 years. They've increased, but they haven't doubled, fortunately. But I'm of the perspective that that's part of a proper financial plan, is to allocate those funds from the money that's saved, and to be kind of be one step ahead. But that's my perspective. So, you know, we get grants, we get other things. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it depends once again on everybody's scenario. But, you know, there's other things that I think I would rather let, you know, because if there's a cost attached to it, it eats away from your fund money. Now, I mean, I'm not pro or against debt. I've had plenty of debt in my life. I still do. But yeah, I just find it really interesting what trigger points people have. And I mean, like you said, it's very much an individual scenario. But I mean, when it comes to home ownership and property taxes, personally, I'm very pro with paying them, but that's just me.
You know, we often tell people, like when it comes to, Laura, with what you were just saying, we like to review our plans yearly. Sometimes we review them if there's a change. So it might be 6 months later, there's been a massive change that we need to sort of rejig the plan for. And oftentimes people don't want to come in because they think it's running so smoothly. It's doing what needs to be done. And that might be the case, but if people say, oh, you know what, I think it's really going well, I don't really feel the need to come in. I'm like, well, we're reviewing with or without you. So you need to come in and whatever. But I mean, we're looking at all of that stuff anyway, even if people aren't making their way in. And usually when they know we're going to do it anyway, people will still come in because it's important enough for us to do it if they're not in front of us. Then it sort of conveys that importance to make sure the plan's working as it needs to with all the variables that we've been presented with, you know.
I just think of the conversations or questions I have with my accountant, and my accountant will have one understanding of my scenario, but as we only see each other once or twice a year, the questions that I end up sending him might be a totally like, you know, like what the answers to his questions might bring him up to speed about what's going on in my life. And like you said, the scenarios can change every 6 months, and it's no different in retirement, right? You might have the opportunity to go on that dream cruise, or your friends might be going to celebrate, or you're invited on a trip and you go, can I afford this? Should I do this? Is this the right decision? You know, or you're stuck living in the way you've always lived and be like, oh, I shouldn't spend that money. But I think too many people, now I'm sure people will not like the fact that I'm saying this for when, you know, if they're set to inherit money, but I think too many people die with a lot of money in their estate, and they could have been spending it and living their life. So, you know,
that actually brings me to, I hope you don't mind if I digress for just a minute
please.
to talk for a second about purpose. Because this is a really, really important part of any sort of financial plan when it comes to retirement. So this is a question that we always start with, because we want to know sort of what type of retirement plan somebody's looking for. Like, are they going to camp in their backyard for, you know, their life because they're happy doing it? That's what they want to do. Or are they going to drive around the country in a Westphalia? Or do they plan to do bike and barge trips throughout Belgium and travel to Asia on a cruise? Like what does their retirement look like for them in terms of the things that they enjoy? But further to that, we always ask about people's purpose in retirement is. Like what's going to be what gets them up on those rainy, yucky Monday mornings when, you know, people just want to stay in bed, but then we have 30 of those days in a row. Like what's going to get people out of bed every day to, you know, continue to enjoy their life? So I don't know if everybody's heard of the Japanese concept of ikigai, but ikigai is basically about your purpose. And so it says, like, you know, if we think of like a Venn diagram where you have all those little circles and then in the middle of it is your ikigai or your purpose, that's what we're going for. What is it that is so important to people that keeps them going even as they go through maybe the not so great and easy parts of all of their life and then into retirement? And we say, well, what's the stuff that you really love to do, but maybe you don't get paid for? And then what's the stuff that you do that you get paid for, you know, and that you're really good at? And then what do you think it is that, you know, is your mission, or what does the world need? And then sort of what, you know, what's your like vocation? What are you good at? And you put all of that together, and right smack dab in the middle is your purpose. And we've seen study after study that say that, you know, when you have a plan for your retirement, when you have a support group in your retirement, and when you have a purpose in your retirement. And I would hazard to say this goes for all of your life, not just into retirement and such, but becomes really important in retirement when you start spending your money. And so if you start thinking about, you have all this money, let's say, and you're afraid to spend it, that might be because, you haven't solidified your purpose yet, right? Or, maybe you haven't done your financial plan, or maybe you're just, worried about it, or maybe a legacy is really, really important to you. There's all those things that we come to so that people aren't afraid to spend if they can make themselves do it. We all know that there's going to be people who go through life and don't want to spend any of that money, and are very concerned that, they leave a legacy, or want to make sure that their family's okay. And that's totally different from being afraid to spend, right? So I find once we know what a purpose looks like for somebody, or what their retirement idea looks like, and then what their purpose and their community and their support system looks like, then it becomes a little bit easier to switch the mindset from saving to spending and enjoying and planning.
That would be a very difficult thing to do, not switching, but doing that. What did you call it? What was it?
Ikigai.
Ikigai. You rattled off the segments of it, and I'm thinking, holy cow, each of those segments, that is a lot of thinking and soul searching to come up with the answers for that. It's a big question. That's a loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and if you think about how many people have spent their lives, they've worked their 9-to-5 jobs, or they've worked 50 or 52 weeks a year, depending on what their careers are, and they've become very successful because they've smartly invested. Oh, Crystal's just spelt it out for us. That's amazing.
Thank you.
IKIGAI. Thank you, Crystal. You're always amazing. Actually, and then all of a sudden, you don't have that purpose. Same as if you decide that you're going to reinvent yourself. So now, like you said, when you go into retirement, if that is a one date fix, I'm not working anymore, or is that a gradual retirement, or is that a transition to working somewhere because you crave the human interaction? I find so many of my elderly clients alone and lonely.
Yes.
And when I spend time with them, I get quite attached to them, and they look so much forward. They look forward to having that next lunch date, or when you sell their home and they move into the seniors, they think, okay, you're just a transaction. I'm just a transaction to them. But then when you see them 2 or 3 times after, depending, they just they're shocked, from our profession. And I mean, I can see how hard it would be. So I think it's amazing that you take the time and actually help that client unpack what their purpose, their plan is, and reflect on a yearly basis, because that could change. You could have health issues. You could have a new grandchild. I see a lot of clients leaving what they would deem their perfect retirement lifestyle in Vancouver Island, and now moving to more economical parts of Canada to be back closer to family, because, it's part of their retirement plan has changed. Now they are grandparents, or now they supported their son with his 2 kids. Now they want to go support their daughter with their 2 kids. And so it's always a balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you find many people actually complete that inner search of themselves when you ask them to?
Oh, I mean, there's some people that will immediately know, or you bring up the concept and say, hey, have you heard of this? And then you can tell it instantly resonates with what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So there's people that already know that, right? They already have figured that part out. And then there's other people that stop and say, oh, hey, I never thought about that. Why is my financial planner asking me if I have friends? That's sort of a funny thing, but it's not so much of, do you have friends? It's what does your support group look like? Who do you hang out with and generally, when we get to that point of, the questions, when we're working with planning, the questions can be very personal, but the relationship is personal also. And It becomes a very sort of in-depth relationship as we go through, because money is one of those things that nobody wants to talk about. And ever. So we get to the point of talking about it, it's there. And I find that in my life prior to this, I actually have a degree in psychology, and I didn't think that would actually be very useful in my life, but I find it's useful all the time now. So, because it's just what happens, when we're talking about these things.
I was just going to say that I end up working with a lot of female clients that have, basically owned their home and they wish to retire. Maybe, like the last ones I think of, they are no longer wishing to work in their careers anymore, and they might be 60 years old. And they're shocked when they find out, when they're aligned with the right financial planner, that they can actually live off of their income by selling their $700,000, $800,000 house for a modest life by not going back to work. They might have their pension, they might have this, but if like they're living house poor as it is, afraid to spend money, hoping that the next big cost doesn't come their way. Like, oh no, what if a roof happens? What if something big happens on my house? And I find that a lot of them actually go and rent and live quite comfortably off their income that can be invested. So not great for us that they don't buy another house, laugh out loud, but a beautiful scenario when you can help someone achieve their purpose through their investment, right? Through their home. So yeah, but it comes down to trust.
Right. Yeah. What I find to be the most fun is when people don't want to stop working. And then we say, well, actually hurting your income now by continuing this. I had this experience with my mom. And I was like, Mom, it's time for you to stop working. And she had retired, but she retired right when COVID started. And so it was a tough start to retirement for her. And so then she went back to work as soon as she could. And then she really didn't enjoy it. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that you're causing your financial plan some difficulties. So like, let's look at this. And she was like, I am not, I'm working and it's helpful and whatever, because that's what she always thought. And turns out she was so excited to retire because her working was actually hurting her plan more because her tax bracket was changing. Things were adjusting for her. As soon as she realized that, she was like retired in a week. So
I'm done. See you later.
Yeah, your mom is lucky to have you say, wait a sec, you might need to revisit that. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, and I'm seeing more and more clients downsize earlier and go down to less time working. So yeah, and I find that a beautiful thing because they're living their life earlier,
That's right. While they can still enjoy it and do the things they want to do. So we've talked a lot about income, but I'd like to just quickly touch on insurance. So life insurance. So what types of insurance should people consider and reevaluate, like once you retire?
So this is a super question. I am going to give a really high level answer to this because I'm not actually insurance licensed. My partners are in my branch, but I am not. So we have a whole bunch of different types of insurance that we could look at, right? We have, of course, everybody knows about life insurance, and there's a couple different types that we could look at there. There's long-term care insurance. All of these are sort of like, hey, let's start working on this plan, earlier in life, so that because the younger you are, the cheaper insurance is, right? So those are things that we always like to sort of talk about straight away, sort of as we're working through our working lives. I find that once we start reaching retirement age, insurance at that point starts to become part of your estate planning, because there's then different types of insurance that you can use to help with that. Oftentimes it can be help with taxes. Let's say you have like a small insurance policy on one side to protect the family cottage, from a very large, your estate from a very large tax bill. You want the kids to be able to keep the cottage, let's say, but your estate will deem that cottage as being sold, and suddenly there's a very large bill that's got to be taken care of. Oftentimes we'll see people take out small policies as they get closer to retirement to make sure they can protect that cottage for people. There's different ways to use different types of insurance. One of my most favorite types of insurance, though, is looking at, I'm not sure how I can just be really careful with my guidelines that I'm working with here, but different types of insurance can be used to help with the estate planning in protecting assets and allowing for beneficiaries of plans that sometimes wouldn't have beneficiaries on them, right? So for example, in a non-registered plan, or let's think about an RSP or a registered retirement income fund like a RIF or a tax-free savings account, all of those are registered plans. So the government allows us to put beneficiaries of those plans. There may be taxable events that happen in the result of, an estate for some of those plans, but we can send that money off to specific individuals. With a non-registered plan, we don't have that option. So that amount of money that you hold in that plan, that might be something that goes to probate. And somebody, I think it was you, Laura, that mentioned probate fees, or maybe it was you, Denise, that mentioned probate fees and things like that earlier in our conversation. That's where we start looking at those different types of plans and saying, hey, is it time that we start using this insurance product to look to keep your investments going and your income going, give you maybe some guarantees if they're there, and then also protect that so that that money also goes to your beneficiaries instead of, to probate, which, is not so bad in Canada, or not in BC rather. It's not so bad, but it is a process that freezes assets, and it takes a while to get through. If we're able to put beneficiaries on different types of our assets, then the people we're leaving our legacy to have immediate access to them.
Yeah.
Or like at least within a week.
I dealt with that when my dad passed, and yeah, it's a big process going through the probate, going through probate for someone, and you are bearing all the expenses of that until funds are released. So it's an important thing to think about, having a beneficiary set up, maybe a specific beneficiary for the executor, so that they have access to some funds while they're closing your estate down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there might be circumstances where somebody might say, it's so important to me that I ensure that this lump sum of money goes to this person or this charity or this whatever, but it's so much part of my estate. It makes up a very large portion of my estate. I don't ever want to spend this money, but how do I still live my life and make sure that's available for the beneficiary of that
Right.
gift, let's say. Then we might look at insurance for those reasons as well and say, well, what can we do on this end to ensure that in your passing, the same amount of money gets paid out for a reasonable cost, so that you can then use this money and live your life as you need to. It's just another part of the strategy that we can revisit.
It's so complex. Like every question we ask, it just is another layer of complexity. And
I'm sorry, I don't mean to make it seem like that.
No, not
fun.
at all. You're doing a great job. It's just a lot. Like I think it's a lot of information, and we've only got one session with you booked, and we still have a half a dozen questions we haven't even got through. So, it just speaks to how many layers and how important this topic is, and how people should really be focusing in on getting professional advice and getting help. And at that point, I'd like to open up the floor to anyone who might have a question. We've got tons of questions we can keep asking, Melissa, but I'd like to just pause briefly if anybody has a question. And you can put it in the chat or unmute your microphone, and we'll get that done. Is everybody good, or? Yeah? Okay, well, let's keep going. Laura, how about you?
Well, I would like to know how I answer the question of my financial broker that they've asked, how much money do I need for retirement? Like, how do I know this? I mean, I don't want to live in poverty in retirement. So I told them I want to live a very good life. And they told me I need, X dollars. Well, so one of my, here's a question about back to the concept of the Japanese thing that you talked about. My purpose is to live my life, right? And so my purpose is not to slave and spend the next 15 years killing myself in my job just so I can have enough money. So how does one figure that out? I mean, I think I've done everything as well as I can. I have a home with a rental asset that will, continue to give me revenue as time goes on. So I'll be able to live economically. I'm in a home I don't have to downsize from. All these little things, the pre-planner, the extreme planner. Denise and I are both extreme planners. All of those go into place. I'm in a walkable area. I'm close to facilities. All these things come into place. So, but how does one know, how much money they need? Is there a calculator? Is there a worksheet? What are some of the tools that one could use other than sitting and having a meeting with you? Are there any suggestions or tips you might have?
That is probably like my least favorite question to ask people. Like, and I never want to ask it. So I ask all sorts of other questions to get an idea. Because that is like quite possibly the most difficult thing to ask somebody when they're in their working lives and they have no idea what the future holds for them. So my suggestion, because when I'm looking at a plan, I can look at a plan from a couple of ways. I could say, well, this is the maximum, given all the information that we have here right now today, this is the maximum spending that you could do. I don't enjoy doing it that way, but I can for sure, if we need to have a starting place. But I often find it comes down to sort of that dreaded budget, because, you know, I think budgets are wonderful things and I revisit my budget every Friday night. Like, I just think
God.
they're fantastic. But, you know, and because I'm all about having a plan, surprise. So it's important. So oftentimes, you know, they know what their expenses are right now, right? They know what their mortgage costs are, what their debt costs are, what the dance classes cost, you know, all that sort of stuff. And when we're really getting into sort of the crux of planning for retirement, you know, that's where we start saying, okay, well, is that mortgage cost going to be there anymore? Well, it's not. So there's a significant cost that's going to be, you know, not there. Or is it going to be for the first 5 years? You know, that sort of stuff. Once we have an idea of what expenses look like just for living in general, that's where we can then start coming up with sort of those magic figures. And sometimes those magic figures are, you know, a combination of your living and what you're going to receive, and that's it, right? That's your magic figure. Or sometimes your living and your you know, pensions and everything you're receiving are going to make you a heck of a lot of money. So if you have an idea of what it is that you need prior to, and I'll always ask somebody about their budgets, if you have an idea of what that looks like, and then an idea of, you know, when you talk about your purposes to live your life in retirement, that's what we really say, but what does that mean for you? Like, living your life, does it mean you get to go for a walk every day with your friends and have a good time, or go on yoga retreats to Costa Rica, or, you know, take that round the world cruise for 6 months? Like, what does that actually mean for you? And then that's where we go to sort of maximum spending, given the information that we have, and then we work with it from there. Because
Sounds like
nobody
they
knows
have to do
what they're
the
going to need.
ikigai first.
Sorry?
Sounds like they need to go back and do the ikigai first.
I think so. I mean, I think it's important.
Yeah.
It's definitely like some people unfortunately will be in a position of knowing their purpose and knowing what they want, and unfortunately financially not able to do that. Right. So
Right.
it's a combination of the two, of being able to figure out how can you live your best way that you want to live, and be able to support that financially so you can continue to do it. Living your
Right.
best life on and spending all your money before you should, or before it's safe to do so, that's not a great plan. And neither is the reverse, right? Wanting to have this great life and not have very much money at all, that's, you know, it can be really tough. So it's sort of finding the balance right in the middle, without actually having to pinpoint what that dollar figure looks like at your first meeting, because nobody
Right.
knows that.
So we do have a question, Manuela. I see your hand up. Ask away.
Thank you. So first of all, let me apologize to everyone if you see me fidgeting a lot. I'm at work. It's my lunch hour. And I'm just
No
trying
problem.
to organize my desk for the next client. So I apologize for fidgeting. Number one. Number two, I've spoken, I've reached out to wealth management in the past, and some of the answers I've gotten were that there's a minimum type of portfolio that they would expect you to come with. And I'm just wondering if through your agency or office, if there's any kind of barrier or any kind of income barrier or any kind of limitations that one might face if accessing your services. I hope that made sense.
Sorry, I missed part of that. So you're wondering if our office has like a threshold
Any,
to come work with
Yeah,
us?
like a
I guess-
minimum client portfolio. Like for example,
you.
I've been told by financial planners, you know, I'll only take you about 100,000, I'll only take you have 250,000, depends on like the status of the financial planner, is my understanding.
I don't know. So that was my curiosity.
That is a really good question, and it's one where that does come up a lot. We of course do have thresholds that we like to work with, and then we have sort of not a case by case basis, but like a planning, because if it makes sense, then we do it no matter what the threshold is. So if you were to say to me, like, you know, I don't know, I have a family member who's 25 years old, they don't have anything yet, they're just learning how to do this stuff, can I come work with you? Yes, the answer is yes. I have a friend who needs to review their pension and they just have some questions, you know, can they come and talk to you about it? The answer is yes. I have $250,000. Is that enough to work with you? The answer is yes. So we're not, we're very careful about the idea of thresholds, but we want to always make sure is that it makes sense for you and it makes sense for us, because always when it comes to investing, there are costs, and we want to make sure that the costs work with everybody. And sometimes those thresholds, they can be quite high because the costs, you know, are a little bit higher, or they make sense for whatever's happening with that particular environment. So I would say if you were to say, hey, do you have a dollar figure? I would say probably 250,000 is what we're looking at. But if you said, hey, I've got a very complex situation and I've got all of these different parts of the puzzle that I need to figure out how to work together, I say, come see me and we can work through the plan and see how that looks.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I'm going to excuse myself so that I can see my client.
Thanks for
And thank you
joining,
very-
Manuela.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Sometimes I
Lots
think-
of notes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think clients don't realize what their actual net worth is, because sometimes we're just so used to, like, they might have been saving, they might have great, like, or, you know, because if you've been put on a plan, and for anyone on this call who's listening, if you can get your family members on a plan earlier, like I remember being, you know, mid-30s, my dad's like, okay, now it's time to make a plan, kid, you know, and it's like you're going to need money for retirement. You've had fun for the last 10 years. Now it's time to continue to live, but you also need to be strategic on how you plan for the future. And so, you know, so that you don't have to be stressed in your last 10 years of work or last 15 years of work, because slow and gradually allows you to build that financial future that you want, right? So
Absolutely.
I think so many people bank on having inheritance money, but that's not a guarantee these days.
No, that's right. Can you believe we're already almost at an hour? And so I wanted to thank you once again, Melissa. It's been amazing and very informative. And
Fantastic
just
information.
before we wrap up, so there's been a lot of information thrown at people today. And so if you were to take just one bit of advice or one takeaway from what we've talked about today, what would you say? Like, what would be your one gem for people? I kind of threw that at you, sorry.
Well, I'm thinking of all sort of the cliche things like start now or don't be afraid, you know, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I think I think I might just have to do that, because it's often fear that stops people from looking at the plan. People are afraid they've waited too long, or they're afraid that it's going to cost them too much or something. So I think I would say, you know, just get a friend, bring a friend and do it. So
Right.
always bring a friend to a meeting. You have two sets of ears and you can, like, you know, both understand, but sometimes it just has to, you just have to step in and just see what it looks like in an environment that makes you feel comfortable.
Mhm.
Bring a second set of ears with you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because even today, I'm glad it's being recorded, because there was so much information coming at me. And I'm looking forward to listening to the recording, because you can only absorb so much at a time, right? So that's great advice, having someone come with you.
I hope I didn't talk too much. It's a very
Not at all. No, it was
Not at all. Not at all.
perfect. It was perfect. Right before we wrap up, any last questions? Nope.
I have one real quick one for you, Melissa, and this is just a personal as far as interest. You mentioned that retiring, you know, people are retiring at different ages. What would you say the average retirement age you're seeing these days is? Because I know it's changed.
Well, I would probably say a little bit later than 65, I'm seeing. A little bit later, because people can and want to work later.
And they're healthier and able to.
Yeah. Sometimes they have to, and sometimes they just simply love what they do and they keep working. So I would say I'm probably seeing people retire later now into their 70s. And then every once in a while, there's somebody that's going to do the usual 65 route or go a little bit earlier at 55 or something,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
usually a little bit later now.
Great. Well, with that, I'm going to thank you once again, Melissa, and thank you very much, Connie and Laura, for joining in today, and Crystal for all your support. And James and Susan, thank you so much for coming to the talk today. It will be available as auto recording, and we'll send that out to everybody once Zoom is done what it's going to do. So have a wonderful afternoon and evening, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much for having me.